My name is Clara Towson, and I'm a friend of the show.
Boom.
I am Francisca George, and I'm a friend of the show.
Perfect.
Hi, my name is Susan Leemans and I'm a friend of the show.
Boom. Yeah.
My name is Zainab Sammaz and I'm a friend of the show.
Boom.
Hey guys, my name is Sasha Vickery and I'm a friend of the show.
Boom.
Hi, my name is Lloyd Harris and I'm a friend of the show.
Perfect.
Hi, my name is Jan Faria and I'm a friend of the show.
Boom.
Yes.
Take one. Well done.
Hi, my name is Jasmine Paolini and I'm a friend of the show.
Wow, Jasmine, you got it in one time.
Ready? Play.
Good afternoon, good evening, good morning, whatever time it is in the world, wherever you are tuning in from. I'm in Germany. I believe, Mert, you're in Turkey, right?
Istanbul, Turkey, yes.
Istanbul. It must be, I don't know, is this just normal for you? 1 minute you're in the US, the next minute you're in Scandinavia, the next minute you're in Turkey. Is this a familiar sort of theme?
Yes, it actually is. It's been like that for several years now. Yeah.
And is it tiring? Do you ever think that you're living a kind of abnormal life compared to, Joe Average who goes to work and comes home?
Yes, it's very abnormal compared to Joe Average. Yeah. Now I did get to spend about a two and a half months period in the US with my daughter, and that felt great, and at the same time kind of unusual, but great. And I think I'm going to do more of that if possible in the near future. But
Okay.
yes, it's an abnormal life. It's not. Look at it this way, John. If you were to take, and this is not vacation by any means, but if you were to take constant vacations throughout the year, even for pleasure, right? And and you traveled 30 weeks out of the year all over the globe just for vacation and pleasure, I would think that after a while, even that would get a little bit tedious. So it's
for sure it does. I mean, does your situation get tedious or just because, I mean, it is kind of because of the abnormality of it. I guess it doesn't feel tedious that often. I don't know.
Yeah, it gets tedious, or during the weeks. It's not tedious. It's fun, and it's challenging. It's disappointing at times, depending on how your player does. It's joyful at others, but it's not tedious. It's not boring, but it's usually the return flights. Once you're done at a tournament and you're returning, that you start feeling the tediousness take over you, and you start wishing that you could just get to where you're going and drop yourself into bed or just into some type of relaxation mode, and wish that it lasted longer than a day or two or a week at the most.
You don't need to tell me, of course, that you are in Istanbul, because we see the curtains, and that means you're back in Istanbul. We've also just been back once again to, on the tennis tour at least, to Indian Wells, and we've seen Jannik Sinner create a bit more history in terms of the fact that I think he's won all the hard court masters now. And I even think the sort of remarkable thing is he's not far away winning them all. I think he's got to go Rome, where he's been in the final before. He's got to add Monte Carlo, where he's not been to the final in the past. And I think Madrid as well, where I think he's not been past the quarterfinals. So it's those three clay court ones that he's either missed through injury or suspension to some extent. So, he may well have won one of those last year, for example. But what a remarkable feat. These guys, because I'm including Alcaraz in particular with these new stats that these guys are breaking at their age.
We might, just on this tournament alone, because of what Daniil Medvedev has accomplished and the earlier stories like Draper's resurgence, so to speak, we may overlook that fact, what you just mentioned, especially considering that those two guys have kind of turned it into norm. So we've come to expect that, and it doesn't become a talking point a lot unless they end up winning the tournament. At the very end of the tournament, we speak of stats of this kind. But it's phenomenal what these two guys are doing, and what Sinner has done in this tournament is also phenomenal.
Indeed. Let's hone in on the final. Did you enjoy it, Merp? Because I was very tired, and I think maybe because I was so tired, I ended up sort of maybe just having my own personal things going on rather than because but there is another thing, maybe I don't enjoy serve-dominated tennis quite as much as, a breakfast, for example. Maybe I don't appreciate some of the qualities, the lines being painted. I'd rather see chaotic tennis, and I don't even mind seeing bad tennis sometimes if it brings the drama. Maybe that's just a personal thing. But I also think, if Sinner goes an entire match, doesn't get a break point on his serve, I don't think he even went to deuce, if I'm honest. And Medvedev, yes, he had a couple of love 30s in the first set, I think, which he got out of. But and then we get the tie break, and we have 12 points all won on serve in a row. There is one point that I want to speak to you about in a moment. But yeah, just in terms of this sort of tennis, does it excite you maybe more than it excites me?
John, it does excite me, but let me just say this right away, that you're making a very good argument from your perspective. There are plenty of people who approach tennis viewing with the same criteria as you do, and I completely understand why this wouldn't be such an appealing final to you guys. And it's just a different perspective. I don't mean that in a derogatory way whatsoever. No. And I do agree that it was a baseline battle. It was a kind of a one-dimensional battle, but I personally enjoyed it because I like looking at baseline patterns and what the players do, how the players adjust, and how they respond to what the opponent is doing so well. And these kind of X's and O's and nuts and bolts interest me. So for me, it was a pleasure to watch, and I actually thought that the level of play was quite high too for what they were offering, and therefore I enjoyed it. But you do make a good point, and let me kind of say one thing to support your point. At the point where we reached the quarterfinals in this tournament on the men's side, 73% of points were ending after the first shot.
Oh wow!
That's the serve basically. Okay, that's quite high, and the average shots hit during points was the shortest in the last 8 years, if I remember reading the stat correctly. Okay, so yes, it was a lot faster, a lot quicker points, and just like you said, and I'm quoting you, I think, is the serve dominated. I mean, 73% of points ending after the first shot is very high, and we're not talking one match here, all the way to the quarterfinals. I don't know if that average changed after the quarterfinals. I doubt it, but it might have. I didn't look it up. But this supports your point, and of course, the court was faster, and the 0.8 points faster in the CPI index. Okay. So that played into it also. But I don't know if Indian Wells used to be the slowest hard court among the 1000s, and or even among hard courts outside hard courts. I don't think it is now, and I don't know how much it moved up, but it's a considerable difference, 0.8. But on the other hand, balls are a different story. I mean, balls fluff up very quickly also.
I wonder if these adjustments, so they changed the surface a year ago, so it mirrors the same surface in the US Open, although I don't know if it made a big difference last year, but for whatever reason this year, maybe also just being hotter, a lot more hotter days this year. So even just having different weather one year to the other can maybe have an effect on that. And certainly Medvedev referenced the speed in his speech afterwards. And I just wonder if what was looking like an Iga and Carlos show in terms of Indian Wells for a few years until last year, might these changes that we're referring to might have just made it less. We don't normally see a tournament's court speeds change that dramatically over 10 or 15 years. I mean, we generally turn up in Madrid and go, okay, keep an eye out for the big serves and the fact that we've obviously got an altitude, and altitude's not going to change, I don't think, too much, although who knows. But it's unusual for a tournament to change that much in a short space of time, I would suggest.
Yes, it's a big change. I think some of it may have to do with the fact that for years and years, Indian Wells surface being slow has been a talking point.
Yeah.
So maybe they felt like they needed to do something about it. And the Indian Wells is, and geographically it's kind of in the middle of a desert, and therefore the air is dry and the balls are moving. The balls go a little bit faster. And most of the matches are being played during the day. There's not a huge night session there. So all those conditions make it a little bit faster too. But then when you add the court speed onto it, or being faster now, it does favor attacking style of play and big serves, which the stats obviously show.
You honed in on a good point regarding the baseline exchanges, pretty much dictating a lot of the match. And yet I would argue...
John,
yes.
Sorry to interrupt you. One more thing, and also the narrative for the last really year and a half, not before, but just for the last year and a half has shifted from court speed, because court speed was a big talking point for a few years after COVID, about courts being slower, faster, et cetera, to the talking points have shifted from that to the strings and the balls.
Okay.
And now with this change at Indian Wells, we have to kind of, put it into perspective that court speed still does matter quite a lot. Sure. I just want to get that point in,
No, that's fair enough. Regarding the balls, they changed this year, right? I think
they went to Dunlop.
Yeah, from Penn.
Yes.
And do you think that may have also had an effect on some of the things we're talking about?
Yes, the Dunlop balls. Well, it may have had an effect in the sense that I think Medvedev talked about this. He's the only one who talked about it, so I don't know if this is the general consensus, that Penn balls were somehow losing their roundness, after a play, after a few games. Whereas Dunlop balls, yes, they fluffed up, but they didn't lose their roundness. So therefore, you didn't get many bad bounces. Now, look, you just put up a photo there for those who are looking at this on YouTube. And this was I was at a W50 ITF W50 tournament in Helsinki last week, and I'm holding two balls there on my hand, John, and this is the Dunlop ATP Tour balls. They played a women's tournament with them. I don't know why, but that's okay. These were the chosen balls. But this is when we went out to practice. Here I'm holding two balls. The one on top is a brand new ball. We started practice out with 4 balls. Okay, and the one on top is a brand new one, hasn't been hit yet. The one at the bottom is after the first rally in practice. In other words, you open up the can, you start practicing the very first rally that the two players hit, where it's just a warm-up anyway, so they're not really hitting the ball that hard either at that point. And this is what that ball is like after the first rally. And that first rally was about 25, 30 shots rally, okay? And that's what it turned to. So it wears out very quickly. And I don't know if you have the next picture, because there are 3 of these photos that I took. But if you look at when you bring up the next one, what we will see is, yes, for example, that photo right there, and I had my notes wrong on that one. It's actually not after about 7 or 8 minutes. This was after about 5 minutes.
Okay.
That ball's turned this way. Look how much they fluffed up. Okay, and then if you show the third photo in the below that one, what you will see is a ball that's been hit after 12 minutes.
Wow.
This is into practice, and this is
let's bring this to the professional tour. I guess new balls are, I think, every 7 games, right? So
7 and 9.
7. Sorry, say again. 7 then.
7 and then 9, and 9 games
can
last. 9 games sometimes can last an hour or 45 minutes.
Yeah. So yeah, they might well be expected, and I would assume they would get hit even harder.
Harder, but less. Of course, in practice, the
Less
rally keeps
true,
going
yeah,
all the time. So you hit the ball a lot more. These are two women at W50 tournament, practicing. And
Yeah.
the ball gets hit a lot more because it's, 12 minutes of practice versus 12 minutes of or 30 minutes. But just like you say, in a match, the ball gets hit a lot harder at an ATP tournament. And it's not after 12 minutes. The ball may become like this, maybe not after 12 minutes, but it's going to get hit a lot after 30 minutes. And by the time they change balls, after 7 games or 9 games, those last couple of games, that's how the balls look, or even worse.
Well, Mr. Medvedev, in his speech at the end, was pleased to say how the courts were a little bit quicker this year, and it certainly helped him. What didn't help him, though, was one point in particular that I want to hone in on, because you mentioned how the match was served. We mentioned how it was serve dominated, but also a baseline battle, and that didn't surprise us, bearing in mind the strengths and weaknesses of these two players. Well, Daniil Medvedev, I think, won 50% of his points at the net, and I think Sinner won 100%. I might be a couple of percent out there, but it's pretty much on. And 50% of the net is obviously not great, but actually, I wonder if they included, I bet they didn't in this stat because it probably doesn't count as a net point. He approaches the net at 5-all in the tiebreak. And it's on
5-4.
Sinner's.
I think if I'm thinking about the
on
point you're
Sinner's
talking
serve
about,
anyway.
5-4.
Sinner's serving at 4-5, yeah. And he has a 7.5 out of 10 volley put away, I would say. It wasn't super easy. There was some work to be done, and given Sinner's athleticism, he might well have chased it down, and then he'd had another perhaps very easy volley, which could have been a 9.5 out of 10. But you get the point. However, he lets it go. And I wonder, and I'm thinking about this from an amateur perspective, admittedly, but I wonder if his lack of confidence at the net was also part of the reason when he went, you know what, we tennis players are thinking about this in a second, I know, and I'm thinking about it in a second too, in a way. I'm wondering if this 1 second process, which is basically, I've got a 7.5 out of 10 ball coming at me, I think there's an 8 out of 10 chance it goes out, and therefore he lets it go, but of course it drops in, and he sort of bangs his head with the racket at that point. That would have probably won the set, given how serve dominated the match had been, and given how serve dominated the tiebreak had been. What are your thoughts on that little moment?
No, you explained it perfectly. You kind of were being modest, saying, from an amateur look, but everything. But I think Medvedev himself would agree with you from judging from his reaction after the point. And I think with the larger point you're trying to make, and I 100% agree with you, is that because he's not used to that kind of, it's not his comfort zone, so to speak, being at the net. He's not that 1 second, half a second of decision making doesn't come naturally to him. I would bet that if it was Alcaraz at the at the net at that point, he would have put that volley away. It was not that hard a volley to put away. I mean, if Alcaraz was on the corner of the court, it was not a low ball, so he would have had to kind of block it downwards to the open court. It would have been an easy put away volley, in my opinion, for his level. But just like you said, he's not used to it, and this also brings me to another point that I wanted to make is one of the biggest differences in the match, because it was a very tight match. It was decided on small things, and one of the largest factors out of those small things was how uncomfortable Medvedev is at the net.
Yeah,
I'm surprised he won 50%. I didn't count. I'm surprised he won 50% of the point. But I also don't know how they count it. I mean, are they counting, for example, if a player hits an approach shot and comes to the net, but the ball never comes back? Does that count as a point won at the net?
Like I say, this point I just highlighted is a loss of a point at the net in a way, but they might not count it because I don't know if a passing shot counts.
When I'm working on this stuff with my players, I usually count that. I hold stats sometimes during the matches or afterwards when we look at the tape. And for me, if you hit the ball with the intention of coming to the net, you're transitioning to the net. And the ball that you hit there is hit with that intention. If you're just hitting a ball with the intention of just staying back, you hit it differently. than when your intent is to come to the net. You take more risks because you're coming to the net. So for me, if you hit an approach shot, you're coming to the net. The other player hits the passing shot attempt into the net or misses it or doesn't even get to that point. For me, that's a 0.1 at the net. I mean, that's the way I count it. I'm surprised that Medvedev has won 50% because
You were surprised it's as high as that?
Yes, because
Okay.
to me it felt like anytime he decided to come to the net, he looked very uncomfortable. You know,
Yeah.
there was a point late in the match where he had a short backhand on top of the net. He nailed it down the line. Okay, Sinner guessed the right side, so he stayed there and he hits the forehand. And it's kind of a low forehand volley for Medvedev, and he doesn't do enough with it. And I think he gets lobbed or passed down the line. I can't remember. He loses the point. He doesn't put that ball away because he wasn't ready for it to come back. And a couple of other times, Sinner floats the ball up in the air, and Medvedev most of the time doesn't take those in the air anyway. But the couple of times he decided to take them in the air in this match, he was hesitant and he moved in a little bit late, and he ended up hitting the swing volley, the drive volley, lower at a lower spot than he should have. So he couldn't really smack it away, and he missed one of them, and he didn't put the other one away. And it's just, you know, that was a big difference. You know, what Medvedev could accomplish on the points that he decided to transition to the net. And I feel like, you know, if he was more comfortable with that, if he got to the comfort level of someone like, say, Alcaraz, then he could, you know, decide to come to the net more, be more confident, make better decisions, and actually turn it into a situation where his opponents fear dropping the ball short on their shots because they know he's going to jump on top of them.
Sure.
And his opponents don't have that fear yet. Even when Medvedev's getting ready to hit a volley, they're ready for the next shot, thinking, okay, I may have a chance at this because he may not put it away.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
And this hurts him at the end. And it was one of the big factors in this match too.
Yeah, I've just had another look at the ATP website, at least. The stats I got yesterday that said 50%, because I'm pretty sure it was dead on 50. It was ones that pop up on the screen at the end of the match, and I know that they do tend to use the same data, but for whatever reason, the ATP website has 45%, but it is still pretty similar. That's 45% net points won for Daniil and 100% for Jannik Sinner. Yeah, quite possibly that was the difference. The second step.
Wasn't that point the point that you brought up 5-4 in the tiebreak? Wasn't that the case where Medvedev did wait a little bit too long to come in on the floater and then ended up hitting a swing volley low and couldn't really put it away, and therefore to it?
He had a chance to come into the net earlier. Yeah, I think he might well have done. There were other. There was another point as well where he sort of retreated, and I don't really like to see tennis players retreat. And by the way, he played a nigh-on perfect tournament, really. So we are nitpicking.
Sure.
But
I mean, we're nitpicking. That's no doubt. You know, but
no, exactly.
You know, I mean,
and I'm sure he's nitpicking too. So, but yeah, there was a couple of retreats. I've seen him retreat. I remember that Australian Open final of 2022 against Nadal was a classic example when he'd be in no man's land, and he was picking up half volleys between the service line and the baseline in that match a few times, and that's just, you just don't want to see your player anywhere near that area. But yeah, there was certainly some hesitancy there. It makes sense. Regarding Jannik, though, I mean, actually, let's just stay on Medvedev one more time. He is kind of back in a way, in that I think he's been written off a few times in the last 3 years. I spoke about this yesterday, that there's some lines in the sand with Daniil. One of them is that Australian Open final, love 40 on Nadal serve in the third set. That's a line in the sand, and some people sort of say he was never quite the same player again. Some people look at Rome 23 as being, I think, his last title for a long time. I think a couple of years anyway, which for someone of his quality is a long time. That's another sort of line in the sand. But there's another line in the sand where he changed his coach last year, wins a tournament in Almaty, his first one for a couple of years. He then obviously has a good little run recently with winning that ATP 500 on the eve of this tournament, and then racing across the planet to get to Indian Wells miraculously, and then goes unbeaten in the desert until the final. But that's 3 finals in a row. But he is kind of back in a way. And now we go, oh, he could win Miami, whereas probably for the last 3 years we haven't thought that.
Yes. And let me draw another line in the sand just to kind of support what you were saying is, He now has 8 wins against number one players in his career,
Okay.
and that's quite high. That's quite high if you consider that some of the greats of the sport have usually between 10 and 15 wins against number ones. I mean,
Okay.
Djokovic throughout his career beat 14 times the number one player.
Okay.
Now, the Federer has 10 wins against number ones. Now, you might say, well, that's because they were number one themselves.
Yeah.
But then again, you have to nuance it. They were number ones themselves for large chunks of time, yes, but for also large chunks of times they were not. So these are guys that have had 20 years plus careers, and Medvedev is not even at say full 10 years of a career at the top of the ATP level, and yet he has already 8 wins against number one players. And even you go back all the way to the 80s and 90s, and usually the greats of the game, they're between 10 and 15 in terms of how many wins against number ones they've had. And once again, the fact that Djokovic has 14 and Federer has 10, and Medvedev has 8, you might say, well, Djokovic and Federer were number one a lot, but they were also not number one a lot for a long time. So, Medvedev, in just a matter of 8-9 years, at a level where he can challenge the top players, he already has 8. He also has 8 losses, so he's 8-8.
Yeah.
Which, if you wanted to reduce it to number terms, he's got a 50-50 chance of beating a world number one when he goes out to play on the court, and that's quite impressive. That's quite impressive. And by the way, for those who are curious, Rafa is way ahead of everyone else. He's got 23 wins against number ones, but he's way ahead. He's a total outlier.
Got it. Yeah, it's because of probably the clays factor, and it's the fact that he spent the least amount of time at number one by some distance compared to Novak. And Rafa.
Sure. And he's beaten Federer and Djokovic a ton of times on clay. So, yeah, no, you're right. But anyway, that was just a side note. Let's getting back to Medvedev. So you have to admire the fact that he's able to go out on the court and play fearlessly, and has a good chance of beating the top players. One other thing also is that he did this tournament. But by the way, I agree with your general point. I think he's back at the top of his game. In fact, I'd call his match against Alcaraz one of the best matches, if not some have called it the best match he's played. For me, his best match, if I want to recall one version of Medvedev that I've seen on top of everything, is his first 2 sets against Jannik Sinner in the Australian Open final.
Okay,
in 2024. Well, that was a 5-setter, and he ended up losing that match. But based on 2 out of 3, the 2 sets that he played against Alcaraz were phenomenal. Probably his second best ever, but his best ever was when he played those first 2 sets against Sinner at the Australian Open, where he was actually playing an all-court game. He was approaching the net a lot. He was taking chances, and when he needed to, he also outplayed the Sinner from the baseline. He just couldn't keep it up for 5 sets. But against Alcaraz, for example, you saw a Medvedev that was on top of the baseline, or just a little bit behind the baseline, taking balls early, not necessarily whacking them like crazy. I mean, he was not playing out of control, aggressive type of game, but he was keeping Alcaraz on the run. And when Alcaraz plays Medvedev, you kind of imagine a match where Alcaraz is running Medvedev ragged. Medvedev parks by the back, drops, like 5 meters behind the baseline, just runs left and right and gets everything back and tries to frustrate Alcaraz. And it's not enough at the end. Alcaraz ends up winning because he's got too many weapons. We saw the reverse of that in that semifinal match. He was Medvedev was the one running Alcaraz like crazy. And Carlos himself said something about that too.
Okay. Looking now at Sinner. Is he back? He was never away, right? Just because he loses 2 matches against Mensik and Novak, the panic button that was being pressed was probably just unjustified, right?
1 second, I couldn't hear you.
Don't worry. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, I can hear you now. Yeah.
Great. The panic button that was probably being pressed for Jannik Sinner in terms of his 2 losses this year against Novak Djokovic and Jakub Mensik, I think that was somewhat premature, and I think this backs it up. Also, I think there was a take, and don't get me wrong, it wasn't a widespread take, but I saw a few people who, by the way, they weren't crazy people. They weren't, bots on Twitter or anything like this. They were people that I listened to. And some were suggesting that there was a bit of a gap growing between Jannik and Carlos after those defeats and Carlos's unbeaten run. I preferred to take a sort of, let's just wait and see how the Sunshine Double goes, and even as far, I'd even wait until probably post Wimbledon before saying, okay, Yannick's losing a few more matches, Carlos is still unbeaten or is still on a run. Then maybe I would agree with that. And I want to see them play each other as well, because the last time they played each other, Jannik Sinner won the match. So I do think that those takes were premature, and also with Carlos losing to Daniil and now obviously Jannik taking the title, it's very much game on once again.
This is once again the Sinner and the Alcaraz setting the bar so high, and we internalize it as the norm. So therefore, when there's the smallest shock to the system, so to speak, Jannik losing to Novak, and then now losing in Doha, I believe, right?
Yeah.
Wait, not Doha. Is it Doha? Yes.
Middle East. Anyway. I often say, do you know what I do? Because I get confused between the tournaments in the Middle East. I just go, the Middle East, or the ATP 500 just on the
right. So he's lost twice, right? I mean, Sinner lost twice. So all of a sudden we're thinking there's a gap and etc. But I agree with you. Let's wait and see if this turns into a long-term pattern before we make such call. And I'd also caution against, saying, okay, here we go. Daniil is back. So now he's going to be that third guy who's going to, let's wait and see what happens on the clay court season in the next couple of majors, and then we can speak from there. But one thing that this showed again is, and this was also proven during the Big Three era, is that it's super tough to beat 2 elite players in a row in one tournament, and Medvedev just had a taste of that.
Yeah. To beat them back to back as that it was. All right, let's move on to some of the other runners and riders in the tournament. We just mentioned him, Carlos Alcaraz. That's 2 Indian Wells now in a row where he's only made the semi-finals. But I was feeling, like I said earlier, regarding Iga Swiatek, I was feeling until last year that this was going to be the ideal tournament, and these guys were going to win, for example, in Alcaraz's case, 5, 6, 7 of these tournaments. And of course, he still may well achieve that feat. But maybe it's not quite as much his domain as I previously thought. But also, was it just a case? Do you as a coach, do you just tell your player, look, he played lights out, maybe you were slightly off on a few points, but it's no big deal and we move on? Or would you rather hone in on, okay, I think we do need to just think about this Medvedev rivalry in particular, because it was one that for Alcaraz, for large spells of his career so far, has been a very it's Daniel Medvedev, no problem. Except for that US Open semi-final, there was a long stretch of wins for Carlos, and they often looked not quite the same, but often quite similar. The serve volley obviously being a huge characteristic that he would bring to both Indian Wells, but also Wimbledon. How do you approach this?
The former, that option that you mentioned, he just had a great day, and you might have been off a little bit here and there, but that's fine. Good tournament anyway. You're doing well. You're having a good year. But I would just stay short of saying at the end, let's move on. Okay. You just say all that minus the let's move on, and then later on the next day, that evening or the next day, then you sit down and say, hey, here's the tape of the match. Let's sit down and watch together, and let's see what we could have done better, or where we might have gone wrong, or where we might have done the right things, but it's just that our opponent also did the right things, and hats off to him. But at least let's see where we can still work on small things and improve. But that's how I would have approached it, and I would have also given. I think Carlos Alcaraz needs to be given a break here. He's had a tremendous year so far, playing very well. And I feel like against Medvedev, he went out onto the court perhaps not expecting this kind of resistance and this kind of high level of play by Medvedev, and he was a little bit flabbergasted, by hitting his usual shots and seeing them come back. Not only just come back, but come back with interest sometimes, and where he had to do a lot of the running. So he was he was out of his comfort zone. Alcaraz was pushed out of his comfort zone a lot. And add to that fact that I felt that Carlos's footwork was not where it has been. Okay. I don't know if it's because of fatigue, because so many matches, or just already an early season with a lot of success wearing thin, mentally. I don't know what it was, but I could see that Carlos Alcaraz's footwork and energy level was not necessarily at its top. And I specifically saw this, John, in the shots after the serve. Carlo, one of his biggest strengths is a serve plus one, the 1-2 punch, so to speak. And he was serving, and a lot of times when Medvedev returned hard down to his feet, or even just simply returned hard, he wasn't ready for the next shot. He missed a lot of serve plus one shots. He missed them, trying to run away from the ball and miss the forehand. He even mishit some of them, which tells you that he didn't really get into position in terms of his footwork. And some short balls that Medvedev hit, he wasn't that first explosive step towards the ball so that he can nail it and perhaps follow it up to the net, wasn't there. He kind of let it drop a little bit and hit a solid topspin ball back. So I felt like there were small signs where his footwork to me didn't feel like he was totally on top of it. He was not mentally as dialed in as he usually is, which kind of reflected on his footwork. This is not to take anything away from Medvedev. He still played a phenomenal match and might have beaten Alcaraz anyway, if even if Alcaraz's footwork was at the top of its level. But this is why I'm saying let's wait and see, because we saw Medvedev's best version here, certainly one of his top versions, and he still had a tight match against Alcaraz. He still had to save 2 set points in the second set, and then he loses to Sinner in a close match, albeit, but he ends up losing. So I still see that these two guys as being ahead of the pack.
Right. Someone who is definitely not ahead of the pack, but did reach the semi-finals, Alexander Zverev. It's the furthest he's ever been in Indian Wells. But then the manner of the loss to Jannik Sinner, 4-2, and maybe, not having to play either of those two before the semis. Obviously, he's a highly ranked player, but I do remember him playing Alcaraz in the quarterfinals, for example, in 2024, the time when the Bees arrived on the court. I don't feel really, I can't get quite where we're at with Alexander at the moment in terms of should we be positive? Well, it's probably not quite as bad as this time last year when he'd had that horrible spell in South America where I don't know if he was that keen on being there. And then he didn't have a great Indian Wells as well, going out to Greek sport early on. So I guess we're in a better place now. But the gap between him and the elite feels as far away as ever. So I remember during the Djokovic Draper match, I was watching that and I was going, of course, we'll come to that in a moment, but I was going, you know what? There are 5 or 6 players on the ATP tour where we might go, this could be the guy. This could be the guy. And I mentioned Artefis, Holger Rune, Jack Draper. Djokovic is the guy, but we're talking, obviously top 2 and then others. But Holger Rune as well. Who am I missing really? Oh, João Fonseca, because of what I'd seen against Jannik, but also just knowing, and I'm not saying they will be the guy, but there's reasons to believe. I find it very difficult to find reasons to believe that Alexander Zverev now will be the guy. To just have a year, just a year of where he's, winning a slam and exchanging great battles with these 2 players. And we go, you know what? Zverev had that year where he got his slam and he exchanged wins and losses with Jannik and Carlos. I don't see that now. I find it very difficult to see anyway.
Well, I think your key sentence, and all that you said, all very valid points. was earlier, a little bit earlier. You said something like, if I remember the exact words, I don't know where we're at with Zverev.
Okay, yeah.
And my answer to that, John, would be, if you knew where he was at last year, or in 2022, or in 2020, or in 2018 or 19, well, that's where he's at. He's still at that same point.
Yeah.
He hasn't added much, and is just staying at that plateau level. Is he accomplishing great things? Yes. Okay. Let's not dramatize one way or the other. I mean, I think I noted down that he's apparently become just the 5th player to reach the semifinals at each of the 9 current ATP Masters 1000 events, after Novak Djokovic, Rafael Nadal, Roger Federer, and Andy Murray.
Okay.
So that's a huge accomplishment. Okay.
Yeah.
In and out of, he's the only guy to do it other than the big 4, so to speak. So he's having a great career. Okay. He's adding to his career in terms of numbers and durability. But if we're looking at where he's at, in terms of his game and what is to come for him, he's at the same point now that he was in the last 5, 6, 7 years, if you were to ask the same question. So that would be my short answer to that. And really, I don't see a long version to that answer either. It's just kind of there's not much to elaborate on that.
Right. Indeed. Well, you never know. He might go on and win Miami and maybe even win a Grand Slam this year. And we'll be revising this conversation then. For now,
I think the second one, major. He needs to win a major to revise this conversation.
Yeah. Otherwise, unless he goes on a run of first round exits, so which he also doesn't want, then that becomes a conversation again. And that's possibly where we're at with maybe Tsitsipas, for example. That's the next level to drop to. But
or he needs to. Well, here's one thing that might be helpful to him. Maybe it won't revise the picture like we're in the terms of what we're speaking now. But for him, it might make a difference if he were to, for example, now go to Miami and defeat Alcaraz and Sinner and win the tournament. That might do something to him confidence-wise, and then maybe prop him up for a major title. But that's what would have to happen.
Yeah. Moving on to some of the other runners and riders. Yeah. So when I was watching this Djokovic Draper match, because I think now we can sort of go in on this, and I think obviously that took a huge amount out of Draper. I remember making a preview for Draper versus Medvedev, and I couldn't decide which way to fall on this one. And it was just simply, do I go with level? Do I go with Draper in the desert? Do I go with potential and possibilities? Or do I go with, I don't know if Draper can replicate that. I don't know if Draper physically is going to be okay, bearing in mind he spent such a long time. It was basically level versus physicality and level of health. And I actually went with Draper to beat Medvedev in the end because I just thought he's got it. And it was a 2.5-hour match against Djokovic, but it was grueling because although you mentioned that stat about serves and serve plus ones and dominating serves, that was a match with some epic rallies. I mean, Djokovic even talked about in his post-match press conference about how he won 1 point, but it actually cost him the game, arguably. And I knew what he meant as a mere mortal. I knew what he meant.
He had to run. It wasn't just a left to the right type of running point, right? He had to run forward, back, and all kinds of directions.
Just a quick thing on this, because again, I was watching this live, and this is my subjective take on epic points. I like to see them with a winner, end with a winner. So if the number of shots doesn't matter. Of course, the more shots adds weight to it. But of course, what you want most is just epic defense, epic attack, lines being painted, as you say, going forward and back, side to side, which we had all of that. There are two things, though, that as someone who just wants to see the point of the year or the perfect point in a way, is there was a net cord in there right near the end, which made Draper's job even harder. If, by the way, the net cord happens and then the point carries on for another 5 or 10 shots, then, okay, that can add to it perhaps. But also, I just want to see it with a winner. And if Draper had just managed to drop that one in, or if Djokovic had won it with a clean winner on the previous shot, then that elevates it to to an even higher legendary status. But that's just my fussiness, perhaps.
No, you're right. That's the icing on the cake, right? You already have a great cake in front of you that you're eating by watching that point, and then you want that icing on top of it too. And when it's not a winner at the end, it's not there. I see exactly what you mean.
In some languages, Mer, I think they use the expression. So in English, obviously, icing on the cake, but in I think Spanish and maybe some other languages, they say cherry on the cake.
That's used in English too. Cherry on top.
Really, do we use cherry as well?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm not a big fan of cherries, so I
like. But I like the expression. Yeah.
Anyway, this situation, Draper, Djokovic, I think these are two players that we can talk about in so many ways. I actually think, certainly for let's talk about Draper anyway. I think for him, this is a great tick to know that the level is still there. The side to side defense in this from him in this match was just wow. Just wow for someone that big as well to move that well and to get down to some of those balls was just off the charts. And also, of course, hitting it really good defense. So the ball comes back deep. I mean, Djokovic was sensational as well. Don't be wrong. I mean, they both were and both had chances. And the other thing with Draper, here's the thing that I took as well from this, Mert, is I think that single match can potentially do more for his career than winning the Indian Wells title last year, than winning in Stuttgart, I think it was a year or two ago, to taking a set off Novak at Wimbledon and other great moments in his career so far, because of the manner of it, because it looked like it was going to turn into a horrible choke. He's serving for it, and I think there's a lot of factors. Sometimes you can lose your serving out a match, and it's not a choke. The other guy just returned brilliantly. You were unlucky, or you served really well, but something happened. But that felt like a choke, and it felt like it was being carried into the next couple of games at times in terms of some of the tightness of the shots. And then to go down, I think a mini break I think he went up a mini break. He went up a mini break in the tie break, lost that mini break, and then Djokovic was up the mini break, and it just felt like at 5-4 Novak but he hit a great backhand down the line. It was attackable, but took a lot of guts. He did the same thing on match point, by the way, but clipped the net. I think it just touched the net. And that's when Novak then puts his backhand into the net. But still, to dig that deep, that must be going forward.
You painted a very good picture there, and you added the details too, the necessary details, which is what happened during the points. And yes, that's a big win for him because, let's just rewind back a little bit. He was I missed the note there. I was trying to look at it, but let's rewind back a little bit. I mean, he missed a long time, trying to recover from his injury, and he's coming back and he's on his way back. Okay, when you come back, you need first of all to find your footing. You need a week, 2, 3, maybe a few months of continuous play, practice, tournament type of play, so that you can get back into the groove of tournament play. And then furthermore, once you get to that stage and you kind of feel confident now that your footwork and everything is back, and you left the general traces of the injury behind you mentally and physically, although small traces of it will still remain there. But if it's only your one big injury, then it goes away quicker than a repeat injury, right? So then once you get to that stage and you're starting to play competitive tennis, you're starting to get back to your level. The big question becomes: can I be where I was when I got the injury, at my top level right before the injury? And this win is confirmation to him, just like you said, that yes, he can get back to his best level. Because of the person that he just defeated. It doesn't matter what version of Djokovic he was playing, whether it was a great Djokovic, mid-level Djokovic, or a Djokovic on a bad day. But the fact that he had to play Djokovic, who's been in those tight situations he's a monster of that, in fact. I mean, he's one of the greatest ever to get himself out of tough situations or close matches. And he knows exactly what to do. in those types of situations. Like you and I know how to eat eggs at breakfast, I guess. But that's that's how good Djokovic is. So to overcome that kind of challenge in that tight a match after blowing chances, there's no doubt that that this year, at least on his comeback trail, this may turn out to be the key match if he gets back to his top level.
I think he doesn't fail to serve it out against anyone else other than Novak Djokovic. I think even perhaps Sinner-Alcaraz, he serves that out. In fact, Alcaraz.
Great point. Great point.
I think it's just because actually Novak doesn't do a huge amount in that return game. In fact, Novak said after, listen, rarely players sort of, but I think he didn't use the word choke, but he just said I think he said he had a horrible service game, or he wasted some chances or something like that. And then I'm sure he moved on with his answer to be very, but there's just no way you could hide. You can't hide that and masquerade that as anything else other than a horrible service game for him. And I don't think that happens against anyone else other than Novak Djokovic. And that's just presence. That's just history. That's just data. That's just watching this guy do what he does. And I think Novak knows it too. And of course I'm sure he likes that element to it.
Well, it's part of your profile. I mean, it's part of his profile at this point,
Yeah, it's your resume that you've built over 20 years. And yeah, he serves that. The exact same match could happen against pretty much anyone else on tour, maybe even anyone else on tour. Certainly on tour right now anyway. And Jack just serves that out one way or another. And we go down and we think, wow, the other guy put up a great fight, but in the end, Jack Draper was just too good. What a great match it was. He really pushed Jack, whoever that ex-player was. But this one,
and John, even if that player does break Draper and gets to 5-all, Draper still tackles the next few games without the thought, oh God, here we go with this guy. There's no way I'm getting out of this now. Whereas
Draper
against Djokovic, he may feel that way.
7-6 and it's a great win, but it doesn't have quite the drama. But yeah, so that also made the fact that he comes from behind in the tiebreak as well even more special. Just a great match. I think I enjoyed it more than any other tennis match this year, but I understand why people might put a lot of stock in those two matches at the Australian Open, the semi-finals. The Alcaraz Zverev match at the Australian Open with the cramping of Alcaraz and the choke possibly from Zverev, and we've seen it before. And when
it was
Zverev,
dramatic, yes.
Yeah, dramatic, but I think I would probably put this one ahead. It's always difficult to compare 5 setters, 3 setters. I guess I can understand a lot of people with how crazy the Djokovic-Sinner match felt in so many respects as well, and a great quality and a sort of final flourish potentially for Djokovic, although we might get one more, who knows. There was a lot of a lot of fondness, I guess, for those two matches, and in particular the Sinner Djokovic. But this was up there.
John, what did you think? Did you? I don't know if you got to watch it. What did you think of the Sinner Fonseca match?
I did see it. Yeah, I did see it. It's one of those.
That was quite a high level too.
Oh my goodness me! We could talk about Zhao a bit actually, because I think there's certain people that will come out of this tournament with having sort of negative feelings for it. There'll be others that didn't win the tournament or didn't even necessarily go super deep, but come out with positive feelings. And Zhao is definitely one of them. Zhao has had, of course, a rough start to the year, undermined, I think, a little bit by the back injury. He didn't highlight it too much in the first 6 weeks of the year, but he did touch upon it at this tournament, where he says the freshest he felt. I felt an intensity and a conviction from Zhao against Tommy Paul in the previous round, which made me feel very good about his chances in Indian Wells, but also going forward. I saw that. By the way, talking of intensity, the Djokovic one, with Draper, the first 4 games, I was like, oh, Djokovic means business tonight. So whereas I've seen him in Indian Wells over the last few years where I haven't felt like he meant business, Botic, Van der Zandschulp, Lucanardi, those losses. But this first 4 games, night session as well. I think the Lucanardi loss was at night as well. But still, I think he does prefer that. And I think actually we saw some of the best matches at Indian Wells occur at night. The Fonseca Sinner also was up there. And yeah, I feel great about Zhao's chances, and I include him in that conversation because he's done it in his late teens. He's shown that he can compete with with Yannick Sinner, which 98% of the tour have shown they can't, whatever the age they are. So yeah, high level, straight sets. He had a chance 6-3 first set in the tie break.
Yes.
I prefer. I think somebody said to me in this like 24 hours later, "Oh, maybe Zhao regrets those chances." I think from memory,
I think only one of them. There was only one point that I felt maybe he could have won, but I thought Sinner came up with the goods there.
Yeah, which one was that? Can you remember the point?
I think it was the 6-5 point. I'm not sure,
happened?
but I think so. But otherwise, yeah, and he's. I thought he played very well too, and I'm curious to see how he's going to do at the Miami tournament. One other thing that I wanted to add, John, I know I'm shifting now all of a sudden, but I should have mentioned this in the semifinal and finals talk. But I don't know why. For example, in the very beginning of the program, we talked about how much you maybe did not enjoy this match, or how much I may have enjoyed it, and so forth. But we each brought up the nuances and the layers why we felt that way. And I brought up the patterns during the rallies, etc. And the one thing I forgot to mention, and we can go back to whatever you want to talk about that afterward. But I feel like this needs to be mentioned. Medvedev's favorite pattern, by far, in rallying is to engage in a relentless backhand cross-court rally. The way he holds the racket, his grip, and the way he wraps his arms around his body, and he takes the ball in front, and it's just more. It's conducive to hitting the backhand cross-court, and most of his backhands when the opponent comes to the net, it's his first choice of passing shot is cross-court too. And I don't know why both Alcaraz and Sinner engaged in so many backhand cross-court rallies with Medvedev, which I found surprising. And they didn't win many of those points either. Once we go past 3, 4, 5, 6 cross-court backhand shots, those types of rallies, Medvedev ended up winning most of those. I don't know why they didn't switch after the first or second shot. They just don't get into that cross-court backhand rally with Medvedev. And there was a point, for example, at 4 in the first set against Sinner in the final, where Medvedev was up 5-4, Sinner serving, and Sinner goes down love 15. He loses the first point, goes down love 15. And in that point, he hit a backhand cross-court. Medvedev hit it back cross-court, and then Sinner nailed the ball to the middle of the court. And Medvedev had to come to the middle of the court and hit a forehand and missed it. And I thought, oh, okay, Sinner's going to stop doing it now, but he didn't. He kept going for that. And no, that's just one minor question that I had in my mind.
Listen,
I forgot to mention in the beginning.
This is just my mind bouncing around. But with Carlos, maybe there was an element of overconfidence. Maybe he was just like, I can play you at whatever game you want, and I'm still going to win.
Maybe, and also when Medvedev would do this against Carlos, after 2 or 3 times, Medvedev would find the angle and hit even a harder to get backhand cross court, and Carlos would stretch out and slice that back. And one of the things that worked against Carlos is Medvedev was not bothered by Alcaraz's slice at all. He would just for a tall guy, he bends his knees well and uses his wrist, he bends his knees well and uses his wrist to brush the ball up. I'm sorry, I didn't hear you.
No, it's fine. It used to be a tactic against Medi, slice.
Right, Dominic
Nadal anyway.
Do that, right? I mean,
Dominic
Thiem would use that against.
Yeah, US Open. The conversation with him has evolved more into the sort of serve volley basically since then. But I think it's also because he deals with the slice much better now than ever before. Yeah, I don't know. Maybe Carlos. This is a question for Carlos, and maybe the answer is not the case. But maybe he just felt so good with the unbeaten start to the year, with the titles this year, with the comfort with which he's beaten most players on the tour, including Medvedev in the past. Maybe he just thought, we can play whatever game you want, Daniel, and I'm still winning this. And that obviously turned out not to be the case on Saturday, because both him and Yannick can change directions at will.
Of course.
Great effect. So it's not like certain players that find that change direction a little bit more difficult to pull off. I'm thinking maybe someone like a Casper Ruud isn't quite so adept at it. Especially
Or Alcaraz and Sinner especially may very well think, hey, I win these cross-court backhand rallies. My backhand is second to none, and I can win them. And just engage. But I just think that it puts Medvedev into such a rhythm to engage in these backhand cross-court rallies. And when there's an extended backhand cross-court rally, even after changing the direction, Medvedev is very dialed in that point at that moment. If that change comes on the 12th or 13th shot, even if the pattern changes, you can bet that Medvedev is 100% in that rally right there, and is not going to give you an easy point. Whereas you do it in the beginning before the rally extends, which Medvedev likes extended rallies. Before the rally extends, maybe you don't let him get into that kind of rhythm. But that's just me talking from the chair that I'm sitting here. So
just one more player I think I wanted to speak about. I could speak about hundreds of players. I could talk about Artefis easing his way back onto the tour in a semi-spectacular. Well, him and Draper I think have done really good jobs of spending a lengthy spell off the tour, 6, 7, 8 months. Albeit I think both actually tried to come back during the North American swing and probably rushed things a little bit and then spent more time on the sidelines, and both maybe smartly skipping Australia when it must have been very tempting to rush back. And yet both have come back very close to the level they showed before. And I think over the next few weeks and months that they will prove that they are back in its entirety. But actually the one player that I just want to speak about before we end is Tien. Maybe that surprises you. I just think that there's a lot to talk about with him, and a lot of conjecture and conversations that we see surrounding him. And they try to compare him with João Fonseca, and they show where Lerner is in the rankings and where João is at. But then João will say, or fans of João will show where their head-to-head is at, and also where João's ceiling is at, arguably. But positives and maybe slightly negatives in terms of the manner of his loss. Jannik Sinner, I think, is a horrible matchup for Lerner. And it was a 1-2 loss, very similar to their final in Beijing, I think it was last year, which was 2-2. And it's just a matchup that from hell for Lerner, because he just doesn't do anything quite as well as Jannik. And I think the things that he can produce that bother other people, I think his serve is underrated. I don't think it's elite, but I think it's underrated. But that doesn't bother Jannik at all. I mean, Jannik can serve the best returners in the world, return the best servers on the world off the court. Also the durability, durability long term, but durability in the first hour and a half of a match, not going to bother Jannik, in terms of lengthy rallies, backhand to backhand, whatever the dynamic is. It's not good for Lerner. But where do you see Tien as a player going forward, Mert?
Yeah, if you asked me this, 12, 16 months ago, I would have put a question mark on, okay, he's very good. He's obviously improving fast. But what does he have in his game that possibly can push him past a certain level of ranking and into the top 10, top 5, and maybe have a chance to beat elite players, etc. And I would put a question mark on that. But what I've noticed, though, and I haven't watched all of his matches, but I watched quite a few in the last, say, 7 to 8 months. What I did notice, though, is he has improved in the last 7 or 8 months in those very critical points that people mentioned 12 months ago. For example, they said, well, he's kind of a one-dimensional baseline player, hits everything back at a certain rhythm. I heard someone say he's a Gilles Simon part 2, things of that nature. And I don't think he is now. He's certainly creating angles with his forehand and hitting winners. Mm-hmm. So he's producing power. He's improved in that sense. His serve has gotten a lot better. Mm-hmm. And he's got great anticipation. I don't want to say he's super fast, but it looks like he's super fast because he's got great anticipation. He can read the rally well, and he's got high IQ. Yeah. So yes, I do see him move up, and I think between, if we're going to have to compare him to Fonseca, I'd say let's wait about a year and see and have a better idea about just the progress of those two, because there's going to come a time, and this happens with almost every player, where they plateau for about a year or two. Mm-hmm. They reach a certain level, and because you can't continuously improve at the rate that they're improving in terms of rankings and play throughout your career, It's just simply not realistic to expect that.
Mm-hmm.
But let's wait and see what happens in about a year and where they are. Are they having to deal with injuries, which is another outside factor that's quite important?
Yep.
And then we can have a better idea. But I will say this: I see potential in Lerner Tien, whereas 12 or 16 months ago I would have had question marks. I'm not saying I would not have seen it, but I would have had question marks. But now those question marks for me, they're gone. The guy's
Definitely.
able to improve. He's playing a good left-handed game. He's creating chances. We just spoke about Draper. Draper, before he got injured at his top level, I still felt like he didn't use his left-handed weapon, so to speak, as well as he could. He doesn't create, super angles on during rallies. He just kind of he's a great rallier, hard hitter. He doesn't do enough short angles, I felt, on his backhand to the opponent's forehand. But Lerner Tien does that, and the way he hits his forehand, it's hard to read where he's hitting it. He can very well hit it down the line or cross court or angle. The head-to-head count, for me, it's fun. It's a fun topic between the fans of the two players, but I don't think you can measure someone's progress with a head-to-head count against a single player. There may be a matchup issue there. There may be other things, but this is. I mean, I don't know how to explain this, but how you do against one specific player is not a principal measure of success on your improvement. It's kind of like in football, or the way we say soccer in the United States. Like in the German league, there may be a team who beats. There may be Team A who beats Team B in both matches during the league, or they may even face each other during the cup, and the Team B might eliminate Team A again, but yet Team A wins the championships at the Bundesliga at the end of the year. And who are you going to say is the best team?
Yeah, of course.
So that's why I wouldn't personally get stuck on the head-to-head count much.
The just one thing on Tien, which is basically kind of saying the same as what you said in a way, is that I think 16 months ago, people would have said, I think, maybe someone said, I think Lerner's got top 10 potential. I'd be like, oh, really? Yeah, top 20. Yeah, top 30. And yet he's already 21 in the world. Correct. I do think clay is going to be an issue for him, but and maybe he's going to have to get some results on clay before he gets in the top 10. But why not? Why not? You only need to probably string from where he is right now 6 good weeks of tennis together, and he'd be knocking at that door. So, and his match with Davidovich, by the way, was a fun match. But also one other characteristic that Lerner has in his locker is an incredible mental strength.
Yes.
And Davidovich, I think I saw a stat during the tournament that was highlighted on both the Tennis Channel and by Miles David that 13 match points. From match point up, Davidovich has gone on to lose the match. And poor old Alejandro. I mean, obviously not winning a title as well. And maybe the most famous example of that is obviously when he has a championship point against De Minaur last year. And I felt bad for him. But
you feel bad because that's what people talk about and blemishes his career. And it's not a bad career at all,
No.
So.
Yeah. Big thanks for joining me today, Mert.
Thank you, John.
And that was a reflection on Indian Wells, seeing Jannik Sinner take his first title. Daniil Medvedev, forever the bridesmaid in the desert, 3-time runner-up. And we had questions and hopefully some answers regarding Alexander Zverev, Carlos Alcaraz, Lerner Tien, João Fonseca, Novak Djokovic, Jack Draper, and many, many more. Thanks for joining, and you know the drill. If you enjoyed this video, make sure you hit that like button. Don't forget to subscribe and click that notification bell so you don't miss out on all things tennis.